Yeah, I'm Leif Rasmuson. I work for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And my main job is I run the Marine Fisheries Research Project, and we basically do work to support stock assessments. Those are the models that tell people how many fish they can catch. And when they do those stock assessments, there are often problems. So we kind of go out and be the problem solvers to go into solving those things. I'll go over a few of those problems we've had. And then the other thing is I'm the co-chair of the Oregon Ocean Acidification Hypoxia Council. This is where we work more in the policy realm, trying to develop policy basically to plan for the future of things like hypoxia, ocean acidification, sea level rise. Sea level rise is a perfect example. All of our processing plants in Oregon will be underwater in 50 years. That's just the nature of sea level rise. So if we want to keep fishing, it's great to think about what happens and how the fishermen get out there, but you got to move those plants first and foremost. So an outline of our talk. So first I'm going to talk about a black rockfish survey. Black rockfish are extremely important to Oregon's fishermen. We're going to talk about work we've done to do the first ever survey from border to border. And then we're going to go into some fish tales, kind of talking about hypoxia, low oxygen events on the Oregon coast, how that influences fish's behavior, but also our ability as fishermen to get out and catch them in the ocean. The other thing we're going to talk about is where the old female rockfish are. Paradigm is boss, big old fat females. The more females there are, or bigger, older, fatter you are, the more babies you make. But we don't have a lot of them, so why is that? And then we've been putting satellite tags on yellow eye rockfish, our last overfish species, and we're kind of looking at the dynamics of their movement and some interesting findings that are coming out. Okay, so basically what we have here on the x-axis is our 4 major recreational fisheries: bottomfish, salmon, halibut, and tuna. So what stands out is that left bar, which is bottomfish. Bottomfish are what our recreational fishermen fish for. If you sum up salmon, halibut, and tuna, it doesn't even come close to what we make on an annual level from bottomfish. When I say what we make, this is not ODFW makes, this is hotel costs. We have economic models that are looking at basically value to the entire coastal community. So bottomfish are really important to our coast. So if we're going to do research, that's where we focus our effort. And if you look at what people land when they're on a trip, when you say bottomfish, we have 86 rockfish species here. Then you add lingcod, you add all these other things. There's a whole lot of diversity. But on the y-axis is a bunch of different species. This is the number of fish that are landed in a year. And this is a huge bar right in the middle. It's 2016, 2017. That pattern consists. That's black rockfish. That is what we fish for in Oregon. Yeah?
Commercial and recreational, or just recreational? Or?
This is mostly recreational that's going in here. We do have a commercial nearshore fishery. It's pre-allocated, and so there's less, but there is an important commercial fishery for black rockfish. Most commercial fishers are out on the shelf with what they're fishing for, so not as important to them. But where the recreational fishermen are fishing is our state waters, and so I try and put my efforts there because the federal waters where the commercial fishermen are, there is NOAA surveys and things like that. So our waters are kind of what are missing. Okay, cartoon of what you'd think of as a rocky reef, all this great diversity of rockfishes, lingcod, kelp greenling, things like that. If you've gone out fishing, you know you can drive around with your boat, you have your fish finder, and you can look for schools of fish. This is kind of the traditional way that a lot of people are fishing rockfish around here. You set your gear, you're likely to catch a lot of black rockfish, deacon rockfish. We used to probably call these blue rockfish. We've actually proved that there's mostly deacon rockfish. It was misidentified as a species a couple years ago. So we've shifted it mostly to deacon here. What you might not know, though, is that your fish finder doesn't work right on the bottom. It struggles because when that sound hits the bottom, it can't differentiate a fish right on the bottom versus the bottom itself. But for me, if I'm trying to count black rockfish, that main one, and the most of the diversity of all these other fish, they're right on the bottom, that actually works in my favor. If I use a fish finder, I can avoid most fish in Oregon, and I can just focus on these few species that I really want to count. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a fish finder. I have a scientific one that does effectively the same thing. It just writes its data to a computer, and it weighs a heck of a lot more. So I take acoustics that I get from that fish finder, and if you go out with your acoustics, as long as somebody can tell me species proportions, if they're 50-50 black blue deacon or 70-30, and how long those fish are, I can turn those numbers into a number of fish in the state. So what we did is we built this underwater camera system. These 2 black cases are 2 cameras that look at the same thing from slightly different angles. If you look at the same thing from slightly different angles, you can actually measure it. It's the magic of what we call stereo vision. And then we have another camera here that looks down at the bottom. Then all those fish that we are missing, we can correct for. It also allows us to do some management of other species like quillback, China, and such like that. But we can still really focus on those black rockfish. You put those together, and I can give you an abundance estimate from there. We do manage based on age in Oregon, so we do some hook and line sampling with this survey to give us age structures, the ear bones out of fish. So we sacrifice some fish, take their ear bones, and then we can age them by counting the rings on there. Put that all together, and we get a population estimate. Okay, so this is the implementation of that survey. So we work with Alpazar and the Pacific Surveyor that runs out of Newport. And so what we did is we went from the Washington border down to the California border, and we did a transect from the 80-meter depth line to the shore every 15 kilometers. And when I say the shore, when we were right off Oceanside, we were on the back of the breakers and we were waving to people on the beach. We are truly getting as tight as we can to the beach. Then every kilometer in between those 15 kilometers, we're doing a transect over Rocky Reef. If there's Rocky Reef, we're going to do extra sampling. We want to go where rockfish are, they're well named, but we also want to sample the sand and gravel and other places so we can know if they've been moving around. This is what our echo sounder looks like. That's 38 kilohertz, 200 for people who are interested, and it's just on this giant steel pole that we just lift up and down. On the southern Oregon coast, when people are fishing out of Brookings or Gold Beach, they're fishing in and amongst wash rocks. We took this boat in and amongst those wash rocks and we hit a rock and had to bring in divers to fix the boat. So we're not going to be able to take that boat in there. But if you want to do surveys and get fishermen to buy in and for us to be reasonable, we have to go in tight to those rocks. So what we did is we cut the back of the boat off. We built this extra crane and we put a little small boat on the back deck, and we can lift this off and we can run those transects in and amongst those wash rocks as we're in those areas down on the south coast. And so you can see this is that boat being deployed. We take the transducer, it's much smaller on this boat. And this is Jim Burke from the aquarium. So we start partnering with the aquarium to drive boats, things like that. So we start getting other people out there seeing what we're doing. Pretty cool. And this is really what our life was like. So basically we sit out there right down here. There's a real-time database that we're writing data. It's being sent to the cloud. It's all being processed, ready to go as we're doing things. So we keep track of what all we're doing. The acoustics are up here. That's the main thing we're looking at. And so the scientists are basically watching it all day, every day, seeing if we see schools of fish, things we need to sample or look at. This is our navigation right here. There's a person actually running it from this little dining table here, and this gives us oceanographic systems and things like that. All this data is also sent right up above us to the wheelhouse, so we can talk to the captain with a radio, so he's seeing what we're seeing, so we can talk. And this is that camera I was talking about. So here's the schematic. We use just chunk iron that we basically go get from junkyards, because we're going to throw it in rocky areas. We're going to lose some of it. It'll rust out, and actually it's not that big of a deal for the environment. It floats 2 meters up off the bottom into these schools of fish that we identify that we're going to target. Here's those 2 cameras that look forward, a bunch of lights. There are oceanographic and other sensors on this camera, and that downward facing camera for kind of correcting that bottom, what we call the dead zone in acoustics. Okay, so what does this look like? You're driving along, you see a school of fish. This is a school of black rockfish right here. We radio up to the captain. We tell him, hey, we want to drop on this school of fish. The people on the back deck use a clapperboard like you see in film. They synchronize all 3 of those cameras. They get it hanging on the rail. People inside the house triangulate surface currents and figure out where we have to drop that camera upstream so it drifts down into that school of fish. Captain turns the boat around. We drop it. It drifts down into that school. We let it sit for 2 to 4 minutes. We pick it up. We get back on the transect and we keep going. That whole process takes 7 minutes. So we go really, really fast because being on boats is expensive. And so if we spend a lot of time on these kinds of things, we're not going to get a lot of data. I'd rather do tons and tons and tons of video drops really fast and be able to do a lot more data. So this is what that camera is seeing. Like I mentioned, those forward cameras, these are the main ones that give us those lengths and proportions. This is the area they see. And you can see over here, this is what a good-ish day looks like around here. So my staff will have to go through and identify all these and measure all of these fish. This is that downward-facing camera. These are things right on the bottom. We can't measure these because you can't get accurate measurements looking at a fish from the top. But we can use those as indices and numbers to do corrections based on some math and things like that. The other thing is we have this thing called CTD, conductivity, temperature, and depth. It basically tells you what the ocean looks like. It gives you kind of where the thermocline is and things like that. For me, I need it because acoustics are very influenced by the speed of sound in water, and that's set by density. So by doing this, I can calculate a profile of speed of sound and correct my acoustics. We also have a turbidity sensor, a chlorophyll sensor, and a dissolved oxygen sensor, so we can start looking at what the ocean's looking like in the nearshore. That dissolved oxygen is going to kind of come back and keep us going into our future stories here in a little bit. And then the other part we have is hook and line. So twice a day, 4 anglers are going to fish on the rail of the boat. 2 are going to use shrimp flies. 2 are going to use herring jigs that are extremely large main test lines. And we found we catch really small fish. With stock assessments, you need those 1-year-old and age 0 fish to anchor what we call the growth curve. I'll show you a growth curve later. And so we found those are extremely effective at doing that. What's also interesting is that our biggest fish are always caught on this small gear as well. So kind of an interesting shift in how people work. Every fish, we keep track of which hook it came off of, how long it was that they were fishing. There's an extraordinary amount of data that's collected in real time as they're going. This is racked to show which hook, which person. There's a real-time database I'm holding here. Kelly is running a Bluetooth link board to a Bluetooth scale, and all these things are going in, all being sent right back into that database in real time, so that it's all being done and processed out there. So when we get back to the shore, we can get back to doing other things. So, like I mentioned, that CTD, we have hypoxia, we can start looking at dissolved oxygen. So we did this survey in 2021. I should have mentioned that, I apologize. And unfortunately, we went out right about here, the end of July. We started on August 1st at the Columbia River. And over here, when it gets down to 0, there is 0 oxygen off Cape Petra. We went fully anoxic for about 15 days. Not a great thing for the first time doing a survey if you go out there and there's nothing for the fish to breathe, but is what it is. So what is interesting though is we were going basically from here to here and going right in the near shore. There was also the NOAA trawl survey, the International Pacific Halibut survey, and so we put all of our data together with other scientists at Oregon State University, and we built this first ever map kind of showing what hypoxia looked like. Nobody really worked in as tight to the beach as we had. So this is, a lot of times you look at this map, you look up off Washington, there's white kind of further in. That wasn't there in the Oregon area because of where we were. So we're kind of, for the first time, looking at our state waters and seeing hypoxia. So that's pretty cool. We're also starting to see those changes there. So what did we do? You'll see in a bit, we were out to sea for a really long time, but when we got down almost to California, I called who was the manager, Karin, at that time of ODFW, or the Marine program, and I said, hey, do you have some extra money? Can I turn around and start over and do it again? And she said, sure, let's do it. So that's what we did. So we get down here to the south coast. This is where we start what we're calling the second pass. This red line is hypoxia, and this morning you can see that the oxygen is well above it. So when we did it again, we had no low oxygen events. Okay, so what does a survey like this look like? So that first pass, when we had the hypoxia on the north coast, we had 44 sea days. We did 595 transects, and we covered about 3,500 kilometers of acoustics. The second time we did 10 sea days, 136 transects, and another 1,000 kilometers. This was 2021, right post-COVID. This survey went from July 31st all the way into December. Because of quarantining, all my staff gave up Thanksgiving with family and things like that. So I just really always like to point that out and really appreciate how much they gave up to make this happen for everyone. What else do we do? We fished, oh, you guys probably recognize this area. 55 fishing stations. We caught about 700 fish, about 600 video drops, and 270 CTD casts. This is a massive, massive data set. We're looking at about 8 terabytes of data per year if we were going to continue to do this. These are obviously much nicer videos from the southern Oregon coast, kind of showing you what things look like. So what happened after that? When you do a survey, the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, the group who basically takes all this data and puts it together, has to review what you do. And so what we did is we went and did a review. For any of you who have gone to grad school, if you've done a master's defense or a PhD defense, imagine a 5-day-long PhD defense from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. where they give you homework at night to answer their questions. It is one of the most intensive experiences I've ever experienced, and I do not wish that on anyone. But we did it. They said it was great. They really appreciated all the work that we had done, and they said, you can put this into the next stock assessment for black rockfish and for deep and rockfish if you will. 1. This is roughly how a stock assessment works. You have things like catch and landings, and that all goes together to give us that stock. And if you're lucky, you put the survey data in, and this all comes together and says, there are this many fish, this is how many you can catch. So I was on the stock assessment team with the federal government, helping do that model in this or was it 2 summers ago? This is what we get. So this is our estimate. This is in number of fish. The feds like to manage in pounds of fish or tons of fish, so there will be a little bit of confusion if we jump around, but I find numbers of fish easier. North coast, this is basically Columbia River down to Cape Perpetua. Central is Cape Perpetua all the way to the Coos Bay Bar, and south coast is Coos Bay Bar to the California border. Sum it up, there's about 13 million black rockfish in the state of Oregon is our estimate. So we put this in the stock assessment, and so this is kind of what we see. Y-axis is relative population status. 1 is what we call conversion. It's what it was before people existed. 0, they're gone, they're extinct. X-axis is years, so you have all the way to 1900. That's our standard. We go out to 1900, and then all the way out to 2023. This bottom black line is if you did that stock assessment and you took our survey out and you did not include it. You end up in this yellow zone, and this yellow zone is the precautionary zone. It means we start pumping the brakes, we start slowing things down. We're getting close to being overfished. This red line is when we're in that overfish range. Don't worry too much about what these numbers mean. It's these ratios that are stock assessment work. And then this green is healthy population. That means fish on, you can catch what you're going for. We'd only done the survey once. So the stock assessors, when you do a stock assessment, just like the methodology review, they bring in experts from around the world, and you sit with them for 5 days, and they review you and give you homework at night to tell you how your stock assessment model is not good. And so one of their things was, you've only done it once. We're not certain. They had uncertainty about the confidence in that data. So this is where we ended up when we put that certainty in that about our survey. If you increase the certainty, you start moving up this scale, and this is 100% certainty in the model. Basically, the stock would be at 90% aversion. So the survey, if fully trusted, let's read that more as keep repeating it and hope that it keeps saying the same thing, could really do a lot in kind of stabilizing what we see here. If we jump to economic value, this is where we ended up. We're at 59% of what the value was in 2022, and a fully appreciated survey, if it went that way. When I say appreciated, I have no bias in there. If it ends up that we're always down low here and that's the reality, I'd much rather say that and be sustainable there. You're ending up at about $30 million. So there's a lot of value associated with doing these types of surveys and continuing it. So why wasn't it more influential? Like I said, they were questioning its certainty in what it was doing. The other thing is when we do our standard deviations, we're saying it's 13 million fish plus or minus 40%. That's pretty high. I will say though, in a lot of other surveys, like the trawl surveys they use up in Alaska, seeing values of 130% and 200% are not uncommon. It's what it is. Well, we'll go into this. So what does that mean? This is uncertainty. This is where we spend all of our time as fishery scientists in this question of how certain are we? What does this mean? Are we on the bottom end, the top end? How confident are you this and that and all these things? And as you know, there's uncertainty in a lot of parts of these things. If you went out and measured all these fish, they're not all the same size, you're gonna have error. If you said, what's the average size of this fish? If I went out and said, how many fish are in a school? This is all schools of beak and rockfish. That's a whole lot of difference if we average those together. It's just inherent in biology. It's very noisy. And this is what my matrix of how all my data comes together looks like. This is a giant mess of a lot of arrows, a whole lot of math. There's 10,000 lines of computer code behind this that I've written that processes all this. This all goes together. And so there's a lot of uncertainty there. 40 is actually not that bad. So basically, am I saying the survey is useless? I would say no, but we'll talk a little bit about why it's not more influential. So time on the x-axis, number of fish. Here's my survey right here, and we're gonna do a stock assessment model. So let's draw some lines through this. We can draw any direction you want basically through that because it only has to go through one point in there at one time. But if we go out and start doing the survey over and over and over, it's harder and harder to have those lines end up in these crazy places because it has to keep going through those lines. So even with this relative uncertainty that's there, you can kind of correct it by continuing to do these things again and again. Okay, so what are the take homes? We have a survey tool that works. Black rockfish are our bread and butter. So if we continue to do this, I'm hopeful that it can do a lot. Even though it wasn't more influential, it did and kept us a lot for our stock assessment. It kept us out of that precautionary zone. Things would have been a lot worse. People who are fishing know we're having bag limit restrictions. It would have been a lot worse without this. It also provided a ton of other critical data. Those maps of hypoxia in the nearshore. We have indices of abundance for every other rockfish species from that downward camera and that hook and line. So it's really powerful in what it does. This is the only work that goes border to border in the Oregon state waters. You want something like that? We want to start looking at these pictures, adapt to climate change. This is likely the way to do it. We hope to keep doing this. I fund this all entirely on grants that I've written, so we will see where that goes. All right, so fishtail. Why were we worried about hypoxia? All right, so basically here's a map of the continental shelf here. Out here deep, we have the oxygen minimum zone, and we have upwelling. Our winds during the summer are from the north. Coriolis effect turns them offshore. It brings these deep waters up onto our shelf. Some of them are low in oxygen. They're not fully hypoxic, but when you bring those nutrients up to the surface, because those are cold and nutrient rich out there, they bloom, they drop, that causes our hypoxic events that we get. So this is kind of the general cycle of what's going on. The oxygen minimum zone is a normal thing. This is not something that's been just invented, or not invented, but is an anthropogenic cause. This has been around as long as we know. If you like swordfish, I actually saw a swordfish when we were doing the survey right off Cape Lookout. They love this area. If you want to go find them, they go hang out right on the top of this guy. But what is concerning is the models are showing that with climate change, we're getting more and stronger winds from the north. That upwelling is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so because of that, we're getting more upwelling that's bringing even more nutrients consistently to the surface, and that's going to increase the strength of those hypoxic events we're seeing on the shelf. And so that's why we're seeing the change. It's not necessarily that the OMZ, the oxygen minimum zone, and those nutrients are different. It's just that they're being brought up and recharging the system a lot more than we ever have. And that's affecting what we're doing. So this is looking at other fishery surveys. This is the halibut survey. This kind of purplish color is where there are skates. That's what they call a long line for when you're doing a halibut survey. Caught no halibut. Right over when there was low oxygen, no halibut. That's a problem. You're going to go out and survey. They're starting to see things. Also, people fish halibut. A lot of us like to eat them. This is the rockfish survey that NOAA does, increasing oxygen and the number of species. They see less species when there's hypoxic events. So this is already affecting a lot of things on the shelf. But that upwelling, those bringing things out from deep, it's going to be more on the shelf. We're wondering what we're seeing. So what about the nearshore? This is Oregon state waters. This is where kind of our place to study and look at. So what we did is we took deacon rockfish, what used to be blue rockfish. We put acoustic tags on. It might have a picture of them, we'll see. And we looked at how their behavior changed. You put them out. We have this array of microphones that listen for their movement. It tells us how fast the fish is swimming, the depth of the fish. And then we put a CTD right out there with all of them. We said, all right, let's see what happens. We got lucky that there was a hypoxic event, so we could also start asking some questions about hypoxia. Okay, so bottom graph, this is depth on the y-axis. The x-axis is hour of the day. Oh man, there's gray here that's not showing up on the screen, but that is nighttime on either end. The middle section is daytime. Up here on the top is acceleration. It's in log space. Don't worry about that. Fish swimming faster if it's higher. This left block is showing you high normoxia. There's more oxygen than normal in the ocean. Middle is normoxia. There's just normal amounts of oxygen. Things are good. And over here is a hypoxic event. What you see is then in high normoxia during the night, they go down. They actually lay on a rock. I don't have pictures here, but deacon rockfish have a home rock, and they sleep on the rock at night. We went out to the rock repeatedly at night and found them just all sleeping together on the rock. Very cute. And they stop basically moving. Not a lot of acceleration going on. You go over into these hypoxic events. They don't go down to the bottom. They're just kind of milling around. Their speed is not as fast as it was during the day, but not as slow as it was at night. They're just kind of milling around, is our guess.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So are they trying to stay above the hypoxic zone? Is that why they're not on the rocks?
That's our guess. We don't really know because our CTD was a board CTD, so it just sat on the bottom. So we only had one spot right on the bottom. So it's a bit of a question. But this is what it looked like, their movement. So these yellow dots where all the microphones are. The black dots are thousands and thousands of observations of deacon rockfish moving. Normoxia, Normoxia, and hypoxia. There were 3 schools we tagged here. You can kind of see their 3 home rocks. This is where they spent 95% of their time in normal oxygen and high normal oxygen conditions. They just hung out on those rocks day in, day out. This is looking at like 100 days, all summed up right on top of itself. Then you go over here in this hypoxic event, scattering, they're moving a lot more. There's that kind of like searching, what we're hypothesizing is searching for oxygen behavior that's going on. So, kind of interesting. They're changing their behavior. But how does this affect us? These hypoxic events are coming into the nearshore. If people want to go out fishing, what would happen? So what I did is I took that same mooring and then I took some other moorings that we have near Newport, and then I took the landings that we have every day and I looked at how hypoxia would affect our ability to catch fish. So our x-axis here is oxygen. These bars are when we're in hypoxic events. And the y-axis are the number of fish you're catching per hour. Black rockfish, cabezon, deacon, lingcod, and quillback. This is really interesting to me. Black rockfish, deacon rockfish, and lingcod, you catch less when it's hypoxic. That kind of tracks with what you think. It makes sense. We go to cabezon, you're going to catch more cabezon during a hypoxic event. I have no idea. I've had many people look at this data, we've dug into it, we've tried it elsewhere, and that tracks. You go to quillback, doesn't seem to bother them. You just kind of catch the same number regardless of when there's hypoxia or not. So the effect of hypoxia on our ability to catch fish, and therefore our surveys, is not going to be consistent, and so we need to make sure we understand some of these dynamics that are going on. All right, so quick take home from that first fishtail. Fish do not respond consistently to hypoxia. I have tagging data from about 20 other species. Deacons are just kind of the prettiest picture, and we see very varied responses. And hypoxia is going to affect our ability to manage these stocks because of our ability to survey them, our ability to catch them, things like that. All right, fishtail number 2. Big old fat fertile female fish keep fisheries alive. This is a rough-eye rockfish from Alaska. This is like a 205-year-old fish. And so they get big, they just keep going. And the hypothesis is as you get bigger, you make more babies. Those babies have a better investment for mom. They're more likely to survive, and this is all a good thing. But here's the black rockfish stock assessment. Here's where it gets weird.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When you say more, like what is more? How many babies do you have?
It's in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, depending on size. I don't remember the exact number, but it's also very species dependent. That rough eye is a very large individual at 205. Our yellow eye, when they're getting up into like, I think we raised a 100-year-old one recently, and it was only like this big. So only. Yeah. So this is black rockfish. And so the y-axis is sex ratio. If you're above this little line in the middle, there are more females than males that are caught and aged. And in the bottom, there are less females than males. We see is that kind of these early ages, we see very few females, and we see, less females than males. What we see is it's kind of level at about 50-50, what you'd presume is sex ratio. We presume with rockfish, it should be about a 50-50 sex ratio. But as they get older, we see this straight down line of declining and declining female rockfish with age. So where are they? Those are those boss. Those are those ones that are making more larvae and having those things. They're disappearing. So this was a question. Nobody really knew where they were. So we decided we're going to dig into the data and see what we can answer, because this is a really important thing. We sent out a survey. We'll go into that. No, great question. We sent out a survey to the fleet to dig into it and see what we could find, and we'll kind of go into that. The first thing is this pattern is something that we see in other species. So same type of plot with the y-axis, the 50-50 line here. This is in the wrong spot. Apologies for that. The blue line is blue deacons. They go to mostly females. The males disappear. We go into widows. They mostly disappear. But if we look at yellowtail, this yellow color, and orange canaries, and black rockfish, this is the same pattern across these 3 different species. They're all kind of semi-pelagic. Yellowtail and black rockfish, in like a genetic sense, are very close to each other, but one's near shore, one's on the shelf. Canaries move all over Hell's Half Acre. So there's something interesting going on here. This data that you're looking at here, this is from Baja all the way up to the Bering Sea. This is all across the West Coast. So this is not just an Oregon thing. So let's go back to black rockfish. That's the main thing we're focusing on. And so where is that kind of shift that happens? This is that age growth curve I talked about. So you see this ascending, they're getting bigger and bigger, and then they start to level off. So about the time it starts to decline is about 17 inches in length is when they hit 10, and then we start seeing those females disappear. But what's important is if we look at size and the percentage of females, the big fish are still females. They're just not old. So if you're big, you're probably a female, but if you're female, you're probably not old. So there's an interesting thing going on here. It's not a size related thing. So what's going on? I forgot I put this picture. So Noah went out into the middle of the North Pacific, right out over the middle of the gyre, and they started doing trawls out about 700 miles. And they trawled up this black rockfish. For people who know black rockfish, that's a massive fish. That fish is still only 12 years old. Even though it's huge, it's not that old in the scale of what we expect. So, interesting things going on. And why does this ultimately matter? If they're out there and we just don't see them, they're still contributing to the population. If they go out in the middle of the gyre from our population dynamic standpoint in Oregon, they're not in our population. But if they're out there and we just miss them in all our fisheries, then they're contributing. That's important. We have to account for that in the model. But if they're not out there, they're not contributing to that population. They're not making more babies, and so we have to start accounting for that. So we need to know which one of these things. When we do the stock assessments, we have to play this game we call kill them or hide them. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So you said that just because you're big doesn't mean you're old. How do you tell the age of a rockfish?
So we take the ear bones out of a rockfish, so you crack their head open and they have ear bones, and then we break them in half, we light them on fire, and then we turn them on their side. You can count the rings, just like in a tree. So, and then what we've done is you always want to make sure that your rings that you're counting are real annual rings, like on a tree. There are what are called checks, so you can have a weird ring that's in there. So we go out, we've also used oxygen isotopes. So we have shifts in our oxygen, like stable isotopes. Basically, we have 18 and 16 that shifts annually, and we can validate our ability to age these. So we've done that work to ensure that what we're calling a year is a year. So this basically leads us to hypoxies. We can't really go out and test any of these. We've talked about how, but there's not really a good way to do this reasonably across the entire West Coast. So the old females move and live somewhere else. So you have two things. They could move up and down the continent or the shelf. They could go north to Canada, down to California, and things like that. Doesn't really make sense because we didn't see these fish in any of these waters from all of these other states, including Canada and what's there. So I'd say that's not likely. They could move offshore. I showed you that big fish from way out deep. That could be the case. I have a branch in right now to go out to Cobb, Seamount, and other places. But if they are out there, there's no way from an oceanographic sense that their babies will come back to Oregon. So they're still not part of our population. We're lacking data. We're sampling our fisheries doesn't represent the population. With canary, yellowtail, and black rockfish across 4 states and 1 other country, and all the different fisheries, you have longlines, you have trawls, you have midwater trawls, you have recreational. It seems highly improbable that everyone is perfectly good at failing at what they're doing with sampling to miss them across 50 years worth of data, but possible. They're dead. The selectivity of the fishery just removes females, and that's what's going on. Well, if we remember back to yellowtail, they're out on the shelf, and that's a trawl fishery. It's pretty improbable that a trawl fishery is going to select just females because we know those schools are mixed sex. And we see it with canaries and with black rockfish. Plus, if we were taking more females, you would presume at younger ages, you would see a much higher than that 50%. You would see more females starting off. So that doesn't seem likely as well. So my guess is it's this one. It's this natural mortality is higher for females than these species. They're just dying at a faster rate than the others. So is that anthropogenic? Is that something we're doing? Arguably, we're not out there catching or killing them. We could have removed a food source. Maybe there was some important forage fish that came out in the winter that they needed to feed on, and we removed it. We don't know. The problem is this data and this pattern goes back into the 70s, and it's been that way since then. There's not really any data source. I can go back even further and get into Odalus to look. So I don't really know. But to us, given 3 species, 4 states, and 1 country, and this pattern, this is the most likely thing. If you go to Occam's razor and, simplest answer is the best, this is where we end up. So, interesting. So, that's kind of the take home from here. We presume or propose that these old females are mostly likely dying of natural causes. Again, that doesn't mean there's no human interactions or cause there, but it's not a direct, we catch them, take them out, eat them. Yeah.
Are there natural predators out there in
Yes.
the water? I mean, sharks and the like.
Yeah, sharks, sea lions. I'm gonna show you a picture of a yellow eye here. Well, one of these guys right here. We were putting satellite tags on them. As soon as we sent it down, this California sea lion brought it to the surface, started smashing it on the surface right in front of us, and we watched this $2,000 tag get snapped in half.
Yeah.
A lot of four-letter words were said at that one.
Darn.
All right, the last fish tail. All right, so now we're going to talk about yellow eye rockfish. This is our last overfish. Oh yeah.
Good question. Is
Yeah.
the size of females and males comparable?
No, females are bigger,
Okay.
so they are sexually dimorphic. The way that they shift though is very species dependent. In those 3 species though, the females are bigger. The thing about rockfish is we have 86 species here. They have filled every environment you can imagine. They do every possible thing. They are forage fish for some live in the water column and swim all over the place, some hang out on the bottom and never move. So the only thing you can say about rockfish is they're really good at having lots of variety in what they do. So the stories are kind of ever changing.
Does the energy drain and such for producing eggs and that sort of thing maybe impact the life?
It could be, and that's very possible. The thing is you see many other species where there are those old females. So that's why we're not sure if you would presume that they would have evolved to persist, because why would those males then continue to persist? That's just evolutionary kind of wasteful. So there's something hinky going on there, but yes, it's probably an energetic problem that's going on.
Is there a connection between size and hypoxia?
There is, but the hypoxia is really an Oregon problem. A lot of those other places, like Alaska, doesn't have those kind of dynamics. So, yeah.
Could there be some sort of change that is affecting another predator that's selecting the females?
Very possible. Yeah, and that's why I say there could be anthropogenic effects of other things that are going on that are so removed that trying to link all those things up is hard. And the fact that we only started taking otoliths out of fish in the 70s, and the pattern shows up right away when we see it, that I don't have a data set to go back to. And unfortunately, it's not like finding ear bones is not a real simple thing to just go out and chase down. Yeah, so this is yellow eye rockfish, kind of the same type of plot we looked at with black rockfish. X-axis is year, y-axis is those same percentages. This is that yellow, red, green we looked at earlier. And this is kind of this decline that we think of a lot with rockfish. We see this fishing, and then we see this massive event of overfishing them, and then we're seeing this population recovery. The red line is California population where it's coming up. It's into that kind of precautionary zone. Oregon and Washington here is just in there. There are 2 lines, but this is one stock with 2 areas for anyone who's nerds out on stock assessment stuff. These are a long-lived species. They live to about 118 years. They're extremely territorial fish. We drop a lot of cameras in the ocean, and we will find them come, and they will basically take over that camera and make it their camera. What's interesting is if you look at the early literature in like the 80s and things like that, a lot of people will tell you, oh, yellow eye rockfish are extremely solitary fish. They don't like to be all together. But as we're starting to go out to those seamounts I was talking about where there are yellow eye rockfish, we're finding large aggregations of them hanging out. So now what we're starting to think is they were solitary because we overfished them. And that dynamic of being at aggregating fish is changing. We're starting to see aggregations come back as the population is rebuilding. Their primary death range is 90 to 180 meters. And there's the paradigm for many rockfish that live on the bottom. We presume they don't move much. They just kind of hang out at their home rock. China rockfish, there are many studies. A thing the size of this table, they will stay there for years and years and years. So, like I said, yellow eye are the last overfish species. Off Newport, we have the Stonewall Bank Yellow Eye Rockfish Conservation Area, YRCA. And so very early on in 2007 when this was set up, my predecessor at ODFW said, hey, let's go out and do some camera work and drop it inside of that YRCA and see how many yellow eye are in there and right next to it. And what he found is most of the yellow eye rockfish, the study was right here and right here, were right outside of it. They weren't hanging out inside of the YRCA. So that was a interesting thing. He proposed, you guys might want to move the boundaries a little bit. So then what we did is, these are those tags we put on deacons. You can see a yellow eye right here with the tag that we put on the outside. Over 3 different years, we went out, we put out arrays, and we tagged yellow eye. When I say we, this is my predecessors in the lab that I've since taken over. And we looked at what their behavior was. Did they hang out in that area, or were they leaving? And can we understand what's going on? We weren't able to tag a lot of fish just by nature of these arrays and the size of yellow eye. But we found is 3 of the fish died, 4 of them left and never returned, 3 moved in and out, and 3 just stayed in their ring. So they don't know the paradigm or the rule that they're supposed to just stay in one place and not move much. There was also concurrent studies going on in nearshore by the same lab with these same techniques, and they found 5 of 6 fish left. So there's something interesting. Yellow eye might be moving more than we thought. And why is this a problem? Well, here's Stonewall Bank, and all these gray areas and green areas are where people fish for halibut. If you've been out halibut fishing, you've probably heard the term pumpkin patches. People are fishing halibut, they're catching yellow eye. Before they had to descend them, you just see floating orange and yellow, which is yellow eye from them just floating on the surface. Now people are descending them. So it's better. But over here on the x-axis is year, and this is the number of yellow eye that are caught for halibut. They're catching a whole lot of them. So that was really why this YRC was set up, to keep people from catching this yellow eye while they're halibut fishing. But if they're swimming and moving all over, they go straight to the East Chicken Ranch. Well, they might get caught in the halibut fishery. So there's some questions. If the YRCA might not be as effective as we thought if they move more. Putting out those receiver arrays like I showed you, every one of those microphones has to be serviced once a month. We have no idea how far they're going, so trying to do that across the entire continental shelf is just unreasonable. Plus, the trawlers would get extraordinarily mad if they started dragging out my gear over and over and over. So what we did is we put satellite tags on these fish. And so this tag basically has a magnetometer in it that looks at the Earth's magnetic field, temperature, light, and things like that, and allows us to triangulate the location of the fish as it's at large. They're expensive, so we didn't get a lot, and I don't go into too many details, but we had some equipment failures, so we're going to go very simple and basic with what we're doing these to be extremely conservative in our results. We tagged 11 males and 8 females, and we released these in May 16th and 17th in 2023. And right now, we have 13 tags that have returned data. So this is what we found. So what we ended up doing, like I said, the magnetometer data didn't work. We looked at when they pop up to the surface, they come off the fish. That should show you basically right over where the fish is. There's a little bit of backtracking, counting for surface currents and things like that that we did to say, well, this is where they probably were, and we can look at time at large and things like that. So this red area is that conservation area. This green dot is where they were all tagged. And the yellow triangles are where all the fish's tags popped. Not one fish, except for maybe this one, were inside of the conservation area. This one up here is all the way up off Washington. What's interesting is although it seems odd, if you zoom in, especially up here and all these down here, they're all over rocky reefs. So it's kind of interesting. You would think if they're all over sand and things like that, we would have been concerned. But this seems to be what's going on. They seem to move a whole lot more than anyone ever thought. This is the distance dynamics. Most of them are moving about 50 kilometers, some inside and less than that. And then there's that one fish that moved up 200 kilometers up off of Washington. So then we said, okay, let's look at, like, are they bigger, the ones that move, or is it tied to sex, or maybe the time and number of days they were at large as things. These are all these stats and things. There is no pattern. We can't find any relationship with who moves, how far, or anything like that. This is a small sample size. There's only 11 tags. We're getting some more. We're going to continue to do this. But it suggests that yellow eye move a whole lot more than anyone thought in the past. So what it may mean is that the YRCA is not as effective as you would have thought for a yellow eye. That doesn't mean the YRCA is not effective. All the other species like tigers and quillback that hang out and don't move a lot are getting benefits from it. But for yellow eye, it might not be the most beneficial thing. There are other YRCAs on the Federal Register that could get turned on. Or maybe because the population is recovering way faster than we thought, it may not be a necessary tool. I don't know. That's outside my world. I'm not in the management side of things there. But I just want to see where they went. So what's our take home? They move way more than we ever thought, predicted by theory. So it seems like something interesting is going on. You guys may know Milton Love, who writes all these cool books about rockfish. He and I have talked about this a lot, and as we've gone through it, he's like, it kind of starts to make sense. It's why would every fish do everything the same? They've already lived everywhere else. Why wouldn't some fish on the bottom move along? So interesting dynamics and starting to say, we need to go back to square one with yellow eye. We thought they were solitary. Now we're thinking they're aggregating. We thought they didn't move. Now we think they move. So let's go back to square one. Like I said, that YRCA may not impart as much protection as thought for yellow eye. All the other species benefit from it. So not saying we should get rid of it. And then it has implications for how the stock's managed. We have those 2 areas in the stock assessment. If they're swimming to California and they're swimming to Washington, things like that, it may be one stock rather, or a 1 area model rather than a 2 area model. So things to think about as we go forward. All right, quick wrap up of kind of the whole thing I've talked about here, and then I can take questions. So basically, we've designed this critical tool that's for surveying our fish in Oregon's state waters. It's really a powerful thing, and I'm hopeful that we can make that happen in the future. Upwelling is getting stronger, and then we're going to have more hypoxia. It's going to affect our ability to survey fish, manage fish, and catch fish. Some things you're going to catch more of. There could be benefits there. If we continue to get out and survey throughout from border to border, we can adapt. I am not a doom and gloom person. I do believe we can continue to manage our fisheries and make things work if we're out there going and looking and seeing what's going on. We do need to continue to learn about the behavior and ecology. Yellow eye is a perfect example. We thought we knew this basic paradigm about them, but we didn't. So we really need to continue to just do basic biology on these things. The lack of females seems to be a natural mortality thing. So while the paradigm says we need those females for those 3 species, the lack of them doesn't seem to be something we have done that we can directly measure. And like I said, with yellow eye, they sure as heck move a lot more than we thought, so we kind of need to rethink their management. So with that, that's kind of, I can take questions in here. We can talk about anything ocean-wise or anything. It doesn't have to just be about these things. My background's actually in oceanography and crabs, so I'm happy to jump anywhere. So, thank you.
Are you looking at
I just want to say that before we agreed to do rockfish in the changing ocean, we had a long struggle inside the Web's planning board because we also wanted to get Dutchman's crab.
And come back.
Okay.
So we've been, so teaser is we've been measuring, so I did my PhD at University of Oregon with Alan Shanks, and he's been measuring megalope people last larval stage returning for daily for 23 years. And since he's retired, I continue to take that on, so we're working on that. Unfortunately, in 2 weeks, we're going to put that through one of those big, horrible methodology reviews so that it can actually be started to use in salmon management because it's an important food source for salmon. So, yeah.
Are you planning on looking at feeding behavior and diet on some of these problems?
Maybe.
Maybe.
It's really hard. So because they get barotrauma, they vomit up all their food when you bring them up.
Yeah.
So how do you measure the diet of fish when they're vomiting? So there are ways around it, but you have to be really careful. We can go with isotope-based methods and things like that. So we've talked about it, but there aren't great methods for rockfish that are you can be super confident in. Some don't vomit, but then you have the bias of, well, why didn't you vomit? There's something wrong with you. So yeah.
Why is there so much more rockfish on the southern coast of Oregon?
They have a lot more reefs down there. I mean, there are just way more rocky reefs. They just mapped Rogue Reef for the first time using multi-beam last week, and it's way, way bigger than anyone ever thought. So basically, we used to think I think it was 60% of rocky reefs are down there. We're now probably more like 80% are down south. That's where the rocky reefs are.
Well, I just wonder, maybe there's more river outlets there, or would that make a difference from the
Probably not for the nearshore. I mean, they're really habitat limited. There's also not a lot of effort. I mean, you have Brookings that's got a good fishery that comes out, but there's not a lot of people in there. You don't have the whole tourist industry like we have of people from Portland and Salem coming out of Newport. I mean, we're running 20 charter boats with 20 people twice a day out of Newport. There's a lot of people fishing out of Newport, and Story has a lot. So I think that's.
Well, but is that considered essential for Newport?
Yeah, I'm saying that's why there's less there. You have that high effort.
Out. They just get caught more there.
What's interesting is well, no, that's actually considered north. So we broke it up based on habitat. So once you hit Cape Perpetua, it's basically sand from Cape Perpetua all the way to the Oregon dunes. And so we didn't want to call that sand patch we wanted to account for the fact that there's probably not many rockfish in that giant sandy patch, so that we're breaking a baseline. So Newport's with the North Coast, if you'll have us. Yeah.
What if anything, can we as recreational fishermen do to help maintain fisheries here?
So, from like a financial standpoint, ODFW has been struggling. There's a marine endorsement that's out there. That marine endorsement will pay to do this survey year in and year out and put us out there, and that's
a box we tick on our license application.
Yeah, it's in legislature and has to be voted on first. But there's a marine endorsement that entirely its goal is to fund me building a full-time survey team and get us out there every year doing this border to border. So that would make it so we do a heck of a lot better. The other things you can do is, I mean, most people are doing a good job of descending their fish. Continue to do a good job of descending your fish and things like that. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main one. Communicate with things you're seeing. Most of the work I do here is because fishermen call me and they say, hey, we saw this thing, or stock says this. And so I learn from you guys and I can help give more management. So tell us what you see, let us help, things like that. So, yeah.
What's descending the fish?
What's that?
Descending the fish.
Yeah, so descending your fish is, you basically, if you catch a fish, it's going to have barotrauma. So its eyes are going to pop out of its head. It's really bad. Barotrauma. Its swim bladder inside is going to pop out of its mouth. It's going to be really bloated looking. And that's because the pressure at depth, and they bring it up really fast, and all that air expands. And so if you take that fish and you put it on, well, for simplicity, let's just say you put it under a milk crate and you just lower that milk crate. All that air is going to go back to that pressure depth, and it will swim back. The swim bladder will go back in. The eyes will pop back in their head. They have higher survival, is what we will tell you. So again, our lab has done a lot of the work, and so we've descended them. We use pickle barrels. So actually, with that yellow art project, that's what we do. So we take the fish, we catch it, we put it in a pickle barrel, put it back down on the bottom of the ocean, we pick it up 2 days later, and we say, how many of them have survived, and what do they look like? And so that's how we can say, like, oh, if you descend them, if you put them back down to depth, they're going to survive. And so that's what we're talking about. A little bit of a non sequitur that's there. With yellow eye, we've held them in the lab. We have 1,000-gallon tanks and looked at their histology and things like that months later, and they're not that healthy. They still have internal bleeding. They still have things going on. So yes, they're alive, but they're not as happy as they were before. But that's what descending.
Can you talk about the device that's used for that, or like which one you recommend?
So most people like the sequelizer. I'm going to try and pull up a YouTube video of fish being descended while we talk. So the sequelizer is one you can buy that works well. You can also use a fish clip, which I think, do I have it on here? I don't have the one I was thinking of. Well, I can send it to you, Chrissy, and you can show people.
In our posted it.
Yeah, we put a GoPro on the descending device, and you can actually watch it recompressing everything going in. But the sequelizer is the best. They're expensive. Fish clips, they're called fish grips. You can put a rubber band on it, and it will lower it down, and you can release the fish that way. The biggest thing is don't use a needle and try and pop them that way. That's not as effective. That said, you go down to the South Coast. I pulled up yellow eye, and you can just see like 7 holes in the side that are perfectly covered, and they've been caught over and over by those long liners, and they keep getting let go, and those ones survive. So the needle is not horrible, but yeah, definitely use the sequelizer. But if you're long lining, it's really hard to do those kind of things because you're running a half-mile long line while you're doing that. It's gonna be difficult. Yeah.
2 questions. I was always told that it's their stomach sticking out of their mouth, not the airplane.
It's the swim bladder that's pushing out.
So I'm a local rockfish angler, and they always get off the bite starting like mid-July and through August. I just assumed it's because there's so much food on it.
Yep. So that's definitely a big part of it. A lot of people told us with deacon rockfish and blue rockfish, they're all like, they all just swim out deep and they're never there during the summer. Like, well, we're doing cameras, we see giant schools. At least that species, they switched to eating jellyfish and things like that. You guys remember when all the sea pickles were washing up on the beach? We would open them, they were just full of the sea pickles and things like that. So some of them are shifting diets and things like that. Others, yeah, they just seem to kind of be eating less. What's going on there? That's that diet question, and it's really hard to get into.
It's not hypoxia, maybe not hypoxia.
It can be that too. That's the wonderful thing about the ocean is all things at once. So what do you, so you're fishing right out here, out 3 Arch, so you guys get a lot of yellowtails and things like that?
A lot of black bass.
Yeah. So
There are
there,
not that many yellowtail, you gotta go offshore to get those.
okay, when we were in here, we saw quite a few yellowtail, but that was that weird year, so maybe they had come in. Yeah, the blacks definitely seem to scatter and not feed as much during hypoxia, because that's what we're showing there. So that's probably could be it, but it also does not guarantee that you had a hypoxic event like last.
There's tons of food, water, crabs,
Yep.
crabs and,
They love megalopy. I mean, that's everybody loves eating those things.
Mega,
Megalopy, they're the last larval stage of a Dungeness crab.
oh, okay,
But the teaser for when you come back for a Dungeness crab.
Yeah.
yeah.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they're quite in your bailiwick. We fish just south of the, my mind just went, like the border of the conservation area, the Cape Falcon
Yeah.
Conservation. Did we fish just south of that? I know there's sampling that has been going on in there since it was established. I went out on one boat.
Yeah.
Do you know if that sampling has given you any useful information, or
Yeah.
has it shown recovery in that area?
It's showing some patterns, but I mean, rockfish are so long-lived that we've always known that it's going to take a long time to see the big effects that we would presume to see with them. So you're not seeing like if you look at some of like marine reserves down in like the tropics, they used to work in Cuba quite a bit, and like we'd shut down areas, and like 3 years later, it was wild. The populations were 1,000 times bigger. You're not going to see that kind of thing with rockfish here. But yes, they are seeing some patterns. We've been able to use that hook and line data in our stock assessments as an index of abundance. But when we got it approved, most of the times the outside reviewers won't allow it because it's in closed areas. So what there's closed areas and comparison areas. They by and large just say throw out the reserves and just use the closed or the comparison areas because that's this goes into all politics of how a stock assessment works and what it represents and things like that. So we have gotten those data in there. They also use Smurfs. I can't remember if Cape Falcon has Smurfs in it, but those small fish, I've used them to anchor growth curves. So they're catching like the young of the year type fish. And so that's with kelp greenling. We did a stock assessment for them and we didn't have any small fish. If you look at that growth curve, it's just like flat line on the top. So we caught some small fish, put them in, and by anchoring the curve and making it more robust, the population increased threefold. So just by putting in some baby fish. So those are some things we got from them. Yeah.
Okay, my second question. If this whole sea otter kelp recovery thing works as people hope, will that do you think that will be a significant improvement in habitat that we'll actually see results from?
Well, so most of the proposed reintroductions are on the south coast. So up here,
Well,
yeah.
anyway.
So I was going to say it up here, not for a very long time with the movements. Down on the south coast, I think you probably will see some benefits in certain places and other places not. I am co-advising a master's student, and we got a project to take. There are models of population dynamics for crabs. We have the one from Tim Tinker for otters. We have one for sea urchins. We're putting those all together to start trying to understand some of those model potential responses and things like that. So there will be some winners and losers, but I don't think it's going to be total me personal guess. I don't think the levers are going to get flipped as hard and heavy as people think they're going to be. Yeah.
How does hypoxia and La Nina and El Nino work?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that we've had a long enough time series that we can associate them, but I'd have to dig into that. I don't know. It's a really good question.
I have a second question.
Yeah.
We monitor dead birds through the Coast Project, and this last winter we saw a die-off-Cassini's auklet. It's not a huge wreck, but significant. Do we get hypoxic events in the winter time that would explain?
Not usually. So If you envision, so the west wind drift comes across the North Pacific, kind of hits Vancouver Island and goes south. During the summertime, California current's on our continental shelf. The winds are coming from the north, and that causes that upwelling, that Coriolis effect. Underneath that, right on the continental slope where it's kind of bent over, there's a thing called the California undercurrent. It's like this jet that goes from Southern California straight north. In wintertime, that comes up onto the shelf and manifests on the surface of the Davidson current, so it's going north. And so our currents are actually going in the opposite direction, and the winds are also coming from the south. So then we're getting downwind. We're pulling warm, offshore, high oxygen, low nutrient waters in. So not probably. Yeah.
In your rockfish surveys, did you capture any biological data about stress levels, like hormones or oxytocin?
We don't. We could. The first time around, we just did kind of what we could get done, and never having done it before and figured it out. We took age and maturity structures, and we took population genetics samples out of them. Taking stress hormones out of rockfish means taking blood samples, and taking a blood sample from a fish is really, really hard. You have to lay them down. You take a needle right on kind of where their caudal peduncle is, like where the tail fin starts, and it's hard. And so no, we haven't. Not to say we wouldn't, but the first time we tried to ran ourselves in a little bit and make sure we focused on getting the most important things. Yeah.
Is it difficult to work with other agencies? For instance, Three Arch Rocks is a federal wildlife reserve,
Yeah.
I'm kind of new in terms of learning about, well, if it's on the beach, you call the Coast Guard. If it's in the water, you call the, it's like this kind of fractured territory.
Not really for us. I mean, we're taking our data to put it into the federal stock assessments.
So it does all end up with federal.
For right now, there's discussions about some species being pulled out of the fisheries management plan, so things could change there. But I have very good relationships with the feds. I work on their stock assessment teams within academia. I'm faculty at OSU, so I bounce there. So for me, at least, and my team, we're well respected, and we really don't have any issues that way. By and large, people respect us
and share data and.
Yeah, because
people aren't duplicating the same thing, or if they do, it's for a reason.
Yeah, by and large, most often the call we get from the feds and things like that is, "Hey, here's the problem. You guys are good at solving problems. Can you go fix this?"
Awesome. Well, I know that I really appreciated hearing all this information. And I just want to thank you for your time coming out here and sharing. And if you're up for it, I think we probably will take you up on the crab. Look, I see so many heads nodding already.
Yeah, I'd show up for that.
That's great. We will follow up with some information I wrote down, different things that we need to send, including pictures of crab life cycle, because it's of interest of everybody. And we will send out a survey after this presentation. So if there are topics in this vein that you would like to explore or learn more about, we want to be able to have that conversation with you and bring you that information. We have Marina. She's here now to help kind of curate those things that that are meaningful to our various different stakeholders in our community. So please do let us know if you're from the fishing community, the things that you'd like to learn about. If you're just in the community in general and you're curious about these topics, we want to know what they are so that we can help you stay as informed as possible.